This is a Labour Lives interview, and I'm in the constituency offices of Jack Dromey MP. Thank you for speaking to Labour Lives. I'd like to ask you how you came into the Labour Party and something about your early background.
I'm the proud son of Irish immigrants who came to this country. My dad is a road digger, my mother is a nurse. They met in the Galtymore dance hall in Cricklewood, Broadway, where thousands of Irish marriages were formed. I was born in Kilburn, which was called then the 33rd County. It was predominantly Irish. I grew up, therefore, in a northwest London working class background. My dad was an active trade unionist. He went from road digging to become a train guard and then a train driver, and he was a member of the old National Union of Railwaymen. In fact, my first political memory was when I was 6 years old, when I was the mascot at the NUR Neasden No. 1 branch every second Saturday morning, having the privilege, so I thought, of drawing the raffle. So I grew up in a working class Irish background with strong trade union roots. I then became active when I was at work after I left school, became active in the trade union movement myself. My first union actually was Nat Soper, the old print union, and then the Transport and General Workers Union. I was also deeply involved in the local community politics. I was the secretary of the Brent Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations, as well as the secretary of the Brent Trades Council. And I brought together the group that formed the second community law centre in Britain of tenants and trade unionists and radical lawyers. I then emerged to fame or notoriety, whichever way one would want to describe it, leading the great Grunwick strike for union recognition together with J.R. Desai, which saw the most extraordinary history being made. It was the biggest mobilisation in labour movement history around a local dispute, and remarkably, given the time, it saw on one particular day 20,000 workers, July the 11th, 1977, demonstrating in support of a handful, in relative terms, of newly arrived Asian women from East Africa, most of them in saris. I was very proud of the stand that we took in that dispute. We did not win ultimately recognition and reinstatement of the strikers, but you never lose a dispute like Grunwick, not least because it ultimately contributed towards what a Labour government did, introducing a statutory right to union recognition. And as Secretary of the Trades Council, I was a member of the strike committee throughout the strike. And after the strike was over, I was out of work actually for 4 months, but I then became an officer of the Transport and General Workers Union. I was one of the last officers to be appointed under the great Jack Jones. And ultimately, I rose through the ranks of the old Transport and General Workers Union to be elected Deputy General Secretary in 2003, and I fought many great battles over the years, and I loved every moment of what I did in the trade union movement. I was always active in politics. Going back to my days in Brent, I was an officer of the Brent East Labour Party.
So when did you actually join the Labour Party?
I joined the Labour Party in 1974. I was an officer of the Brent East Labour Party. In the work that I did in the union, I was always immersed in politics as well as the industrial life of our members. And if I can give a couple of examples, is that when I became Deputy General Secretary, we had, for 20 years previously, our agricultural section had been campaigning against the wild excesses of gangmasters in agriculture and fisheries. But painfully little progress had been made industrially. What it required was political action. And so I chaired the coalition of support around the Gangmasters Licensing Bill, which was a private member's bill, that we took through Parliament into law I then appointed actually the first chairman of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, and this was in 2004. Highly effective body that has made a real difference in a world in which, to be frank, there are many employers who are akin to gangsters in terms of how they operate. So I could give numerous examples, and it was the great Jack Jones who said that working people, their twin access to power is their union card on the one hand, and their right to vote and the Labour Party on the other. And what working people, in my experience, understand is that power matters, because in the workplace, if you've not got power, then if you are powerless, the employer has the whip hand. And so for me, it was that Jack Jones tradition of working people, the exercise of power, both industrially and politically. And then when I was elected Deputy General Secretary of the Union, I became a member of the National, I was elected the Treasurer of the Labour Party and was Treasurer for 6 years of the Labour Party until I became a Member of Parliament in 2010.
So you were involved at the very heart of the Labour Party,
yes,
and have been for a number of years.
Yes.
It'd be fair to say there has been some controversy in part of your career.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking particularly of the treasurer role when the Labour Party had some difficulties with monies that were either being lent, yes, to it or whatever. Monies that you have put on record saying that you knew absolutely nothing about. And yet the Labour Party seemed to be operating a separate sort of system of loans and monies that were going into the party to shore it up, to keep it going as a fighting party, to compete with the Tory millions that seem to come in every year and every decade. That must have been a trying time for you.
Yes, it was. It was a profound mistake to take out secret loans against the background of the National Executive Committee knowing absolutely nothing about what was happening. And the history of it, briefly, is that post the Iraq War, I think there was concern coming up to the 2005 general election, and as a consequence, because money is important to fight general elections, there was a scheme put in place to take out secret loans to help fund the 2005 general election effort. Now, that was absolutely wrong and should never have happened. Now, there was also suggestions about cash for favours, but I think that regardless of that, you should not have had a £14 million raised without those ultimately democratically accountable having any idea about what was happening. And when it came out in 2006, there was an awful 3-day period in which it was coming out in dribs and drabs to me and the other officers about what had happened against the background of mounting press coverage. But to be frank, I wasn't being told the truth. And I made it absolutely clear that I was not prepared to be part of a cover-up for what had gone on. And that's why I went public, said it was wrong, and what that led to was then two things. The first was the law was changed to ensure that never again could you have loans used, in particular secret loans, used as a device not to disclose that you were getting money from A or B. And secondly, what it also led to was a new financial strategy for the Labour Party, which is ultimately seen, by the way, despite all the problems we've got now, the Labour Party move on to a much more stable financial footing than it was then. I mean, then the Labour Party was near bankrupt as a consequence of these secret loans. So I regret that it led to a big fallout between myself and Tony Blair, but in a whole number of ways, albeit he was a remarkable man who led Labour to 3 election victories, and we transformed the country as a consequence, and I'll never forget that, is that the wrong thing was done, and it may sound corny, but I was not prepared to support doing the wrong thing.
It must have been even more difficult because, of course, you're married to Harriet Harman MP, a long-time member of Parliament, has held important offices of state, and at that time a member of Tony Blair's government.
Yes, but you have to do the right thing. I've always believed in that. You have to do the right thing. And if the wrong thing was done, and you get asked effectively to be part of explaining it away, well, I was not prepared to do that. So things have now moved on. The law has been changed. I don't think it is conceivable now that you would ever see the Labour Party ever again engaged in any practice that could not be defended in the public arena, particularly on this issue of money. There is a duty to be totally transparent, to be Caesar's wife. I'm not the great fan of that phrase, but it gets used a lot. In other words, to conduct yourself with an integrity of approach. It's absolutely essential.
You, I've always thought, as a straight-talking Labour man.
Yes.
I was very pleased to have gone to the mass picket in 1977. Albeit that I got assaulted by a police officer at the time, as did many others, unfortunately. But what strikes me is that you were considered very much to be, if you like, Red Jack Dromey.
Yes.
Do you still see yourself as Red Jack Dromey, the socialist?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Have you changed over the years?
I do. I was born on the left and I'll die on the left. In the old Transport and General Workers Union, I was a founder member of the Broad Left, which was then the Tribunites and the Communist Party, who were at that stage strong in industry. And I was a Tribunite member of the Labour Party, that sort of Bevanite tradition. Now, for me, what I rejected in the 1980s was a politics of ultra-leftism, which ran the risk of destroying the Labour Party. And what we saw in 1981-82 was civil war with an ultra-leftism which was deeply destabilising. And I and many others on the left stood out against that. But not to send the wrong message, I supported Tony Benn in 1981. But when in 1982 it became clear that supporters of Tony, that the war was going to continue, irrespective of the damage being done to the Labour Party, I was one of the first, in fact, together with Tom Sawyer, trade union modernisers. But I was a moderniser of the left, and I supported then Neil Kinnock, who was a man of the left, leading a modernisation project that transcended some of the old political divides and brought together people of the left, like myself, sort of centre-right, into a process of rebuilding the Labour Party. In other words, a rejection of a crude sectarianism in favour of a left-led politics crucially designed to win power. Because if there is one thing I disagree with in the debate going on right now within the Labour Party, when people say power doesn't matter, providing we're a social movement, I say come to my surgery and see the people who come in tears on impact of still the bedroom tax, disability benefit cuts, people with desperate housing problems. Power matters. Power matters, and we have got to win. But going back to that period, and ever since, I was born on the left and I'll die on the left.
Do you think that, as Tom Watson has said, that there are large sections of Trotskyists within the party or influencing young people?
I'm not sure Tom talked about large sections. Is it true that, however, that there is, once again in the Labour Party, some people whose politics I saw firsthand in the first half of the 1980s, once again in the Labour Party? Yes, it is true. It is true. But if I was to look at what is happening, goes significantly beyond manipulation by a small core of hard leftists. But yes, there is a renewed problem of ultra-left or hard-left sectarianism in the Labour Party. There's no question of that.
Let me move on to the referendum.
Yes.
The referendum, you worked hard in Birmingham for the Remain campaign,
very.
As many other MPs did.
Yes.
But you had certainly a high profile. I know that personally, having campaigned with you. One of the things that interests me is sections of the city. I mean, your own. We're in Birmingham Erdington,
yes,
and here we had some of the highest levels for leave in the city. Why do you think that is?
Because what we saw in the referendum was an anti-politics, a protest vote by people with a raft of discontents, not just on immigration, having a hard time in their lives, and a seductive simplicity to the Leave campaign that ultimately saw, I thought, a disreputable and dishonest campaign succeed. So I don't criticise the people in Erdington, those, for example, those particular areas, the white working class people left behind. I don't criticise them for the way that they voted. Looking forward, I think we have to do two things. First of all, there's been a shocking rise in racist abuse since the referendum campaign, and I chaired a summit in the House of Commons back in July around how do we progressively unite communities all over the country. We're going to be doing that here in Erdington and Birmingham to stand together in opposition to racism. But secondly, the great task is to reach out to the millions of people who have become disaffected and disconnected because they need to understand that we get it in terms of the problems that they face. And I'll tell you a little story that brings it alive for me. We were involved in the organising of a major event, I won't bore you with the details, about 3 weeks before the referendum campaign. And there were several hundred people assembling in Erdington High Street in the pedestrianised area just outside of the co-op. And there was 4 white English working class guys outside of the pub opposite the co-op. And they were quite aggressive. They were talking about leave and go to some of the polls there, for example, go back home. And our people were spooked by all of this. And so I said, no, I'm going to go up and talk to them. When I got into discussion with them, pretty quickly, one of the 4, I told him to go and F off on the basis he was a racist and I wasn't going to have any shit of the kind of which he was talking. But then one of the others, he poured out his heart over the 10 minutes that followed. He'd been a rover worker for several years, lost his job when the company collapsed in 2005, had been an agency worker ever since, on lower wages in a very insecure world where there's a lot of migrant labour and employers use often that migrant labour in terms of keeping down rates of pay. And he just felt insecure and desperate. But talk it through with him towards the end of the discussion. I said, I absolutely get it in terms of what you're saying, but the problems you're facing are not a consequence, are they, of the migrant guys? And we started talking about some of the polls he worked with. The problems you're facing are as a consequence of the governor, the employer. He said, yeah, that's absolutely right. So in the end, we sort of shook hands, and I think he might even have voted to remain. But I tell that story to make the point very strongly that even if I think the outcome was shocking, the campaign was disreputable, Aaron Banks from UKIP saying we won by posing immigration against the economy, and I think that was outrageous. Mainstream politicians putting race and immigration mainstream, poisoning the body politic of this country. Even if I think that was outrageous, I stress again, we have to learn lessons, including that very, very big lesson of reconnecting with the people who once looked to Labour but increasingly don't.
In this present campaign that's going on, we have a situation whereby, let me put it this way, we've got Owen Smith saying that he's looking to have a second referendum.
Yes.
We have Jeremy Corbyn saying we must respect the vote.
Yeah.
We have people like Roger Godsiff in Birmingham Hall Green saying to a public meeting or a meeting of the Labour Party that if Article 50 comes before Parliament, as it may or may not do, we don't know how that process will come out, he will vote against that because of the vote of Hall Green constituency. Where do you stand on that? Should there be a second referendum?
Look, I think it is absolutely too early to say. I mean, for me, what's unthinkable is that we have a permanent breach of our relationship with Europe. I think the consequences of that for the continent and for our country would be very serious indeed. So at the next stages, I rule nothing out. Now, I think we have to respect the fact that the referendum was lost. There's no question of that. But you would be a brave man or woman to know exactly where we'll be in 2 and 3 years' time, and to what extent attitudes might shift on the part of the general public. I mean, for me, the given is that we have to robustly make out the argument for remaining part of Europe. If that sees a shift in public opinion whereby a second referendum might be appropriate, so be it. But to go into this process by saying to the British public, I'm sorry, you got it wrong, I'm not sure is the best start to what we've got to do at the next stages.
And lastly, in terms of the Labour Party and its difficulties at the moment, you're somebody who I take it is supporting Owen Smith's candidature to be the next leader of the Labour Party. If he doesn't become the leader of the Labour Party, you as a Labour member, at the very heart of, if you like, the Labour hierarchy for very many years and an influential figure in those party. Will you leave the Labour Party if Jeremy Corbyn continues and wins a second term?
Never, ever. I would find it unthinkable to walk away from the party that has been the party of working men and working women, the party of small L Labour for 100 years. I would find it unthinkable. Now, what is happening at the moment is deeply damaging, and there is no question but that Labour faces potential disaster at the next stages. But I am one of those who believes that Labour is the vehicle for the aspiration of the kind of people I grew up with. I want to see the best for Birmingham and Britain. That will never be delivered through a Conservative government. The only credible alternative is a Labour government. So have we got to overcome our deep difficulties and reconnect with the British public? Yes, we have. But that anyone should do anything designed to break up the Labour Party, I fundamentally disagree with that.
Therefore, can I interpret that for Labour Live's listeners that you think it's going through a rocky period now, but are you ultimately an optimist or a pessimist for the future in terms of the Labour Party?
I'm an optimist.
Either in the short term and the long term.
I think in the short term the situation is bleak. I think in the long term I am an optimist. But there's a caveat to that. Is that I remember I led the most successful battle against a workplace closure in Scotland. Back in 1992, Ravenscraig had closed. I led the battle to keep Rosyth Dockyard open, and there was 20,000 Scottish jobs who hung on that campaign. And I'll never forget, at the end of the campaign, when we'd won, The then Scottish Regional Secretary of the TNG said, "We all thought that the yard was dead, Jack, that the stench of Raven Craig hung over it. But you were always optimistic." He said, "We've never met anyone as optimistic as you." He said, "I think you've got the capacity to be cheerful at a mass funeral." So you'll forgive me, therefore, when I say that I'm innately an optimistic personality. I think you have to be. But even allowing for that, am I entitled to be optimistic about the future of the Labour Party? Yes, I am. Where we are right now is catastrophic.
Well, thank you, Jack Dromey, and I hope that you'll speak to me again after the Labour election leadership campaign and give your thoughts to Labour Lives perhaps in the future.
Look forward to it.